I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P and you're watching the Cartoon Palooza. Well, it's been a couple of months since I watched that. Well, I figured I'd counterbalance with a good Dr. Seuss adaptation, which is Horton Hears a Who. Now I know what you're thinking if you've only heard of this film. It was okay, but nothing special. What, a 75% rating on Rotten Tomatoes? There's nothing spectacular about that. Well, if you had to ask me which is my favorite computer animated film in the last 5 years, Horton Hears a Who will be in the top 5. Why? Well, I wouldn't want to spoil it all out, but I'll keep my reasons to about 5. That's right, just as I've come up with 5 reasons to stay away from the abomination that was Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat, I'm here to lay it out with 5 reasons to give Horton Hears a Who a shot. Let's start from the beginning with number 5. Number 5, the plot. Kinda makes sense when you consider that without this, there wouldn't be a film to begin with, or at least a film with a coherent narrative. Horton Hears a Who is actually 2 stories that complement each other. One is with one of Dr. Seuss's few recurring original characters, Horton the elephant. He's strong-willed but generally a misfit among the other animals in the jungle of New. One day, as he's moseying around, he hears, as the title implies, a who. Actually, it's more on par with an apocalypse scene in a Roland Emmerich film. And we are introduced to the film's second story, which features the Speck Whoville. Oddly enough, without Mount Crumpet's overblown Ron Howard setting. The town's mayor can communicate with Horton to his dismay, find out that the town is a speck being watched by a giant being in the sky. I'd make a joke about Christianity here, but let's be honest, you probably came up with it before I did. What most people complain about feature-length adaptations of Dr. Seuss stories is how extra padding keeps the spirit of the short children's book from going above and beyond. Here with the 2 stories where the characters that can't see but can relate to each other as misfits gives the film the much-deserved boost it needs. Added on the fact that it's only the mayor that can hear Horton through a gutter and only Horton can hear the mayor through his large ears, obstacles in the forms of the jungle's authority try to keep Horton from succeeding that he should listen to specks that he can only hear. In itself, it's the only story the original book deals with since it's short. However, the mayor tries to deal with having no authority in his own town because it's a board committee who's responsible for making the shots. Both characters have similar struggles that surprisingly takes up its worth for an hour and a half, never feeling redundant and keeps me awake. Then there's also the 4th point which I want to bring up. Number 4, the characters. As I mentioned before, the 2 characters with hearts of gold is enough to keep me through. At first I thought it would be odd to have Jim Carrey play the character of Horton since he makes his career mainly playing over-the-top goofballs. In this book and other shorts, Horton's more carefree and, I'm gonna be honest here, a goody two-shoes. He always puts himself over others and usually makes himself seem like the loser who somehow comes out on top. Oddly, in that sense, Jim Carrey as Horton kinda makes sense. If Horton's the dork who puts others in front of himself, then it would make sense to have him be a dork who can't help himself. The same goes for Steve Carell as the mayor, who's in a similar position as him, and for argument's sake, it's great to see these 2 together again. The same goes for the other side characters who, quite literally, are as colorful and interesting to watch. Especially the mayor's son Jojo, who by the end you really root for, especially for those who already read the story. Irregardless, the characters were given funny lines to work with, as I'll discuss in the 3rd point. Number 3, the voice acting. This is where most of the character animation will end up paying off. Whether it's easy enough for Jim Carrey to voice cartoon characters since, let's be honest, he practically is a cartoon character, the same could go for Steve Carell, who can play the manic, paranoid mayor well. It's a hard thing to comment on because the animation is much a visual medium as it's auditory. It helps when the voice actors can complement the characters they play rather than go into the studio for a paycheck. It's usually my biggest worry when big studios get big name actors to voice characters. Well, it isn't the case here for the most part. But as I mentioned before, you can't have good characters without good voice acting alone. Number 2, the animation and humor. I think these 2 go together since most of the best humor comes from the way these characters move. Some of the jokes would not work if it weren't for the way these characters act. I mentioned before the voice acting plays a big role, however you can go only so far when your animator doesn't incorporate correctly. Just look back at the scene where the mayor goes to the dentist office and Horton tries to cross a rickety bridge in some of the best slapstick and timing I've seen in a while. And right here, I'm going to go off record and say that Blue Sky Animation is one of my favorite underrated computer animation studios out there. Aside from the never-ending Ice Age franchise, They managed to make films as well designed, lit, composed, and for the most part, do well at the box office. Not bad for the studio in Connecticut. How about some Northeastern pride up in here? Yeah! When I say that they're underrated, it's mostly because their name isn't around or big guns like Pixar or DreamWorks. Give it time though, and I think they'll catch on. And I think this film is a textbook example of why. If you did watch my previous film, remember how I said Dr. Seuss adaptations should focus more on the general structure of these characters as opposed to the colors? Here the colors serve a purpose, but what really matters is getting down the exaggerated and yet structured look that Dr. Seuss provides. Everything in Horton Hears a Who has weight, structure, and above all else, its relation to how they move. All the characters have everything. There's rhythm, extreme pose-to-pose animation, composition, movement, and arcs. And let's not forget that the film was animated on a computer, which I've been giving the Maloikia since it first been conceived. I'll even go as far as to say that movement-wise, this is some of the best computer animation I've seen where the animators have effectively transmitted from page to pixel. Eat your heart out, Pixar, cause these guys are coming after you. Number 1, the theme. What more could you ask from a film that at the root of it all has a clear-cut moral? Even before the movie came out, I knew Horton the Elephant had 2 codes of conduct that made him a thoughtful and overall great character from Dr. Seuss. There was,
but a person's a person, no matter how small.
And
I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. And an elephant's faithful 100%.
There's no way you can make the effective movie with Horton the Elephant not saying those 2 phrases. It didn't feel forced and gave me the warm feeling from the first time I heard it read to me. I heard a rumor that Dr. Seuss made this book as an apology for the bombing in Hiroshima, which he felt partly responsible for, having made propaganda in the form of political cartoons. No matter the size of a country or how much you underestimate their worth, you should always treat others as you treat yourself. Between the mayor, the town of Whoville, JoJo, Horton the Animals of Newell, this rings true. There isn't a moment where it felt forced or contrived. Sure, it's been done in movies, but here it feels genuine, and that's all the movie has to ask for. And those are my reasons as to why I think Horton Hears a Who is one of the best Dr. Seuss adaptations, and possibly one of the best computer animated films in the last 5 years. And it doesn't besmirch the Dr. Seuss legacy, as another film has. But I have been getting a lot of comments as to what I think about the Lorax, which I'll tell you right now.
Watch me tumble! You are fast, Horton, but the kangaroo has monkeys! I will make monkeys of these monkeys. It is their destiny. Huh?